As we continue our dive into the minutia of ways that government shutdowns hinder agency operations, we turn now to the ongoing lawsuit over the mass firings at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau earlier this year. Perhaps no other agency faced as large of a percent of workforce and budget cuts from the Department of Government Efficiency. Now the government attorneys who have been assigned to defend the moves in court are forced to ask for a delay since they're not allowed to work right now. To get an update on this case and the effect shutdowns have on federal lawsuits overall, we spoke to Rich Andreano, a partner at Ballard Spahr. Why don't we start with just the lawsuit overall? As I mentioned in the intro, CFPB employees were let go due to the DOGE cuts that started right at the start of the Trump administration. And so those employees, which is their right, came together and decided to sue, calling the firings illegal. And now the government attorneys that are it's their job to defend the government moves. They're forced to ask for a delay because of the ongoing government shutdown as of this taping. Do I have that correct, or am I missing any part of the story?
That is correct. What happened is at the D.C. Court of Appeals, in a 2-1 vote, the panel said the Trump administration could move forward with the reductions in force. The plaintiffs then, on the last day they could, filed for a rehearing en banc, which is a rehearing for all the judges, not just a 3-judge panel. So the administration has a deadline of October 21 to file a response to that, but there they've asked for a stay, saying we're not allowed as DOJ employees to work on this matter, so can you please grant a stay? As of the morning of October 17th, when I checked the docket, the court hadn't ruled, though I expect they will grant the stay. In another matter before a D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, that's the American Federation of Teachers lawsuit against Department of Education, challenging the alleged pause of a student loan forgiveness program. Similar request for a stay, and the court did grant the stay and canceled on October 31 hearing as well. So I would expect the D.C. Court of Appeals will grant the stay here as well.
Yeah, looking at overall the Justice Department, we've ran a couple other stories and had a few other interviews about attorneys, or the Justice Department has lost a good amount of their expert attorneys, and they're already kind of facing a backlog with more federal lawsuits coming in than ever. Where does this lay on their priority list as far as, is this just another thing on the to-do list, or is this really becoming an issue?
I think it will. The Treasury Union case in particular, because that's one appears to be a very key goal of the Trump administration, is to reshape the nature of the Bureau. So I think they will put efforts in this case. I do note they have actually made filings in at least 2 Supreme Court cases this month. So it seems that whatever resources they may have left, they're putting them on the most important cases, which obviously be cases before the Supreme Court. So they have filed 2 briefs. One is in the case where the Trump administration is seeking to have the court uphold their firing of Rebecca Slaughter, the FTC commissioner. And other cases are less popular, less known case, rather. It is an immigration case against Pamela Bondi, the Attorney General. And they filed briefs in that case as well. So there is some work going on. But I think the Treasury Union one is important, and it's before the D.C. Court of Appeals, which is in a very important court.
Yeah, when they ask for these stays because of a ongoing government shutdown, what does the court have to take into consideration? I mean, nobody really knows, Speaker Mike Johnson included, when this shutdown will end. I mean, what is, at some point, do the judges have to make a decision and say, look, you got to bring someone forward whether they're getting paid or not? I mean, what's the protocol?
Yeah, that's generally in this case, the hope would be the shutdown is not going to be extended, and so the stays will, in the end, be minor inconveniences in the scheduling. One interesting thing that we'll have to see, though, is the courts themselves. Apparently, they have funding to last sometime into November. If we get to the point they run out of funds, do we have no judges to hear cases at that point? So it could, if this is extended one, it could get quite interesting to see what happens at that point. And one thing, their dockets are going to get very clogged, and that's something judges don't like. And so we'll have to see how they react to that. But they may become subject to the shutdown themselves.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's an aspect that not many people are paying attention to. And what's the status of federal courts overall? Are they facing, you mentioned the long docket list. Everybody knows the issues with immigration courts as well. But what about the federal judiciary itself? Where are they at these days?
Right now, they're still operating. I regularly check the dockets, and filings are being made. They're issuing orders, responding to briefing, scheduling hearings. So right now, it's business as usual, although a very heavy caseload given the number of cases filed against the administration. But that may change if this lasts until November. Then things may get different at that point.
We're speaking with Rich Andreano. He is a partner at Ballard Spahr. All right, so while I have you here, I mean, you are a lawyer. Why don't we talk a little bit about the law? The CFPB firings, what is their main argument into why these firings were illegal? We've seen similar cases come from unions, but not necessarily specific to one particular agency. What is their main argument?
The main argument, and it's really the root of it, is separation of powers under the Constitution, whereas Congress created the CFPB and gave it statutory duties. The allegation of the plaintiffs is the reduction in force would be so significant that the Bureau could not carry out its statutory duties and therefore would violate the Constitution in that Congress has mandated that this agency exist and perform various functions. It creates an interesting issue, and some people say put aside what is the Trump administration, but it's really when it comes to who should decide what the appropriate level of staffing of an agency is. Is it the federal courts or is it the executive branch? And I think probably it's the executive branch, unless, if they wanted to reduce the CFPB to 5 employees, then clearly a court would say, no, that's absurd. That can't possibly perform your statutory duties. But 200, 300, 500, 1,000, that's something I think that probably falls more into the executive branch realm. And although the case now is before the D.C. Court of Appeals, I've said it really doesn't matter what the Court of Appeals does, even if they take up the rehearing, this is going to the Supreme Court. And given the prior rulings that have been favorable to the Trump administration, I think the Supreme Court will let them, proceed with reductions in force, though there's one caveat. You probably heard recent press reports are that the OMB director, Russell Vought, who's really acting director of the Bureau, has apparently said he wants to shut the Bureau down in 2 to 3 months. And that probably has made the government attorney's job a lot harder in the courts, because obviously if the intent is to actually shut down the agency, the courts are not going to let that occur.
Yeah, it's been crazy listening to the live stream of these of similar cases, and it sounds a lot like my political science classes back in college. I mean, they're bringing out, they're talking about the 3 branches of government and presidential impoundment. I mean, is that the main arguments that we are still hearing today now?
That it really is what is the appropriate role of the executive branch, Congress, and the courts. That's what this is basically about. It is political science 101, the U.S. Constitution. And it's interesting to see where we go. And it appears some of these cases, including the case involving the FTC commissioner, may have significant changes in law, because there is a case going back to the 1930s where the Supreme Court upheld the requirement that the president can only fire an FTC commissioner for cause. The administration now is challenging that, saying the nature of the FTC has changed so much over nearly 100 years that it's now really an executive agency, not a legislative agency. So the president should have the right to fire an FTC commissioner without cause. And the court's going to decide that case, and they may very well overrule that 1930s case where they said the for-cause provision was constitutional. They may now determine it is no longer constitutional.
Yeah, I wonder about that because, when President Trump was elected, I had some people, asking us, can they shut down an agency? And our reassurance to them was like, well, I don't know if they can because the agency was created by a law. And so by law, the agency has to exist. Is there going to have to be a recourse for future presidents if they want to make sure that an agency exists after their tenure, that another person can't just come in and, completely gut it in the manner that the Trump administration has?
Yeah, that's where I think the Supreme Court ruling is going to be interesting, where do they draw a line at some point saying, at a certain point, you're reducing the staffing so much that the agency can't possibly function, and we're not going to allow that. So it's really going to come to how much deference do they give to the president here, and I think that's going to be important. The thing is, however they rule, if they give great deference, another administration can come in and greatly increase the size of an agency. Now, one factor that will reduce the CFPB staffing overall was their budget. The One Big Beautiful Bill actually significantly cut their budget. Prior to that, they were entitled to 12% of the Federal Reserve's operating costs from 2009, adjusted for inflation. That put them in the mid $600 million range. That got cut to 6.5%, so almost a 50% cut in their budget. That budget cut alone is going to reduce their staffing. They just can't possibly have the number of individuals they had before. But that would only perhaps reduce it by half, not by the significant amount that the Trump administration apparently has proposed. So I think this Supreme Court ruling is going to be interesting. And do they draw any bright lines? They usually don't like to draw bright lines, but rule in more generic terms. So I think they'll allow a reduction, but they'll probably put some words in it. But it has to be reasonable and allow the agency to continue its statutory functions. I'd expect that's probably how they'll come out.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound as if, they're only citing of that an agency has to exist because it's, by law. After all, the president won the election. This is what the democratic process has called for. You ask somebody to form a government, and this is the way that they are implementing it. Does the White House have a case here saying, hey, we ran on this platform of cutting in a certain agency, we're going to cut the agency?
Yeah, I think so. As long as it still performs its statutory functions, and there's reasonable room for argument on what that means and what level it is. But indeed, I think that's right. An administration has right. Well, we believe in smaller federal government, so we're going to downsize. And then administrations come in later. No, I believe in bigger federal government, and we're going to upsize again. And as long as we get the funding from Congress to do that. So I do think it is the prerogative of presidents to decide how active a particular agency is or is not, as long as they stay within the bounds of the statute that created the agency, because that's the prerogative of Congress, to create the agency and give it functions.
So once again, we're riding the roller coaster of democracy, and the technicians are all the Supreme Court, right?
There you go. Yes, indeed.
Rich Andreano is a partner at Ballard Spahr. Since recording that interview, the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals denied the Trump administration's request to stay the deadline to file a response to the National Treasury Employees Union. The deadline to file was yesterday. You can find this interview at federalnewsnetwork.com/Federal Drive. Subscribe to the Federal Drive wherever you get your podcasts.